nice, very nice. I'm so grateful.
And I'm excited as well, just to get our session started, because it's already 3 p.m. Eastern time, 9 p.m. Central European time. Welcome, everyone. This is the 48th webinar in a row. To be honest, we started a year ago to provide those live sessions. So this is a final session for this school year, where we decided that we're going to celebrate successes of teachers around the world and provide you with a session, a summary session, to share stories of success and also some stats that we see of how remote teaching succeeding during those very troubling time for many. And today, for this session, we asked special guests to join us, Simona and Suzanne, the authors of the Teacher Within book, which is kind of like a book on the psychology of change, if that's the right way to put it, Simona, Suzanne?
It's the right way. It's a journey within for us as teachers to build our own self-awareness and to build our own inner confidence so that our teaching is more successful and that we are less stressed.
Oh, that's very applicable. And, you know, we can relate to that. All of us that teaches remotely these days can relate to that. So thank you for joining us, Susan and Simona.
Thank you very much.
Great to have you with us. Together with us is Reshan as well, co-founder of Explain Everything, director of studies at New Canaan Country School in the US, and author of Blending Leadership book. That's your first book. Is that correct, Reshan?
That is correct. And the more recent book is called Make Yourself Clear. I tried to hit the start video button, but it said I'm not allowed to. But if you can hear me okay, I'm fine just being a mysterious voice during this webinar.
We can hear you fine. Absolutely. Fantastic. Yeah, so let's get the session started. You know what we're going to do today. We're going to celebrate the success of remote teaching. Of course, it was difficult for many of us. It was challenging, but hey, many of you succeeded, and that's what we want to celebrate today. So to get our conversation started, as I'd love to get your input, Simona, Suzanne, and Reshan, on some of the topics and some of the feedback from teachers. To get this session started, let me share with you some feedback that we received on social media from teachers. And I'd like to cover two areas that were most important during the last 3 months. That is the area of doing explainer videos. You know, Explain Everything is the platform for many to create explainer videos. And those explainer videos can be quite simple, like a simple screencast where teacher can add voice to existing materials, and by this create a simple video lesson. Or there can be more elaborate and, you know, sophisticated. We call it sometimes supercharged, or it can be an element to communicate back and forth with students to understand their thinking, allowing them to create videos. And what we gathered during the last 3 months is a tremendous feedback coming through different channels, like, you know, this is here. I'm displaying you feedback that we received through app figures. I love this app. We love those comments. Thank you for this. Or this one from Amy, moving a science class online. Explain Everything as a great tool for creating whiteboard-based course content that can be posted on YouTube. Yes, I'll show you some stats, how many videos were posted to YouTube. Advise chunk materials into 5-10 minute segments. Easier to focus and fix it if mistakes happen. Yeah, or here, blended learning approach for students to use to revise key concepts, explain everything. And there is an animated illustration. There are so many of those tweets, I won't be able to go through all of them, but I'd like to express my gratitude and thank you for those, for teachers that decided to share their reactions and their successes on social media in relation to this scenario, creating explainer videos. This is fantastic. And this is just one of many scenarios, and not to overcomplicate, I'm going to show you some praise coming through social media to us on second scenario, that is collaborative lessons. Many teachers during these days were looking for ways to engage with their students more. And by engaging more, I mean those situations where cooperative learning was needed and appreciated, or group exercises or one-to-one sessions. And here you see praise coming through different channels related to this scenario, where Explain Everything was used in many, many different scenarios with younger students in high school, on universities. And this is phenomenal for us to observe this, as it kind of like, you know, provides us with feedback that we so need when working hard to keep the platform working for you. So from my perspective, I thank you for this. And in order to show you in perspective how many teachers used Explain Everything for explainer videos or collaborative lessons, I'd like to show you one thing. So I'll find an empty spot on our canvas and I'll bring to the canvas this infographic. And I guess that will be the great point to start our conversation. These are the numbers of how many teachers participated, joined us in the last 3 months, and what they did on the platform. So if you look here, when the entire situation with pandemia started, with COVID-19, we decided to open full access to our platform for groups of teachers, for schools and for districts. And the interest in that was phenomenal. The biggest was in March, of course. That was the beginning of the whole thing. But there was a large interest also in April, some interest in May. Altogether, we opened 1.2 million new accounts for teachers free of charge, so they can use Explain Everything to support their teaching during this time of accelerated transformation to online teaching. And in total, teachers from around the world spent over 374 years of whiteboarding time. So you can imagine these are like 6 lifetimes. It's a lot. And we understand by this how much we need to pay attention for the experience that you have within the app. But getting back to the praise that I shared with you and the reactions related to those 2 scenarios that I mentioned, explainer videos, that's not a tool I wanted to use, sorry. Explainer videos here and collaborative lessons here, we see that altogether teachers shared almost 800,000 videos, but through unique streams that is available through Explain Everything Drive explainer videos, they shared almost 250,000 videos in 3 months and started 370,000 collaborative sessions with from 2 to 20 participants altogether. This is this is what we see, and you can tell by the distribution here when it was most important. It seems that April was the time where teachers were able to use this platform to the fullest extent, as they onboarded this new tool in March and started to use it in full in April. And of course, because we're now at the end of the year, there is decrease in use of the platform. But we see that those lessons that were shared as videos have sometimes thousands of views, and the top lesson was viewed 9,000 times. This is not a YouTube video. This is a privately shared video lesson that was watched over 9,000 times. And when we think of collaborative sessions, at peak, we had over 800 lessons at the same time with 2 to 20 participants. So I wanted to ask you this. It shows that teachers are successful with the platform, successful transforming their teaching, moving their teaching online. But I wonder if it's more of a technology challenge, or is it a challenge in adopting the tools that exist? Susan, what do you think about this? Is it more of a technology or changing habits?
I think it's a combination, and it is dependent on who and how somebody is using their technology. If they're tech savvy, then the human element may be more difficult. But I think that actually remote teaching is a challenge for us in a positive way, because we can bring humanity to teaching. In as creative as we can be, we can bring humanity into it. So when you ask which way does it go, it goes both ways. And one of the things, Bart, when you were talking to me and Simona about this, I recognized that this is giving us an opportunity to do whole brain thinking for us as teachers. We have the opportunity to take the tech part, which is a lot left brain, and the humanizing and the social emotional learning part, which is often more right brain, and connecting them into a whole to bring a greater result than we ever have before. So I would suggest that we look at this in a positive light, that it almost doesn't matter where it's coming from, but how are we internally taking it? How are we looking at this opportunity as an opportunity or as a fear? And I think that's the that I would ask teachers, because I think that's where the reality is going to set in.
As an opportunity or as a fear? And for you, is it more of an opportunity?
Probably some of both. That's a good question. Before we got on, I said to Bart, am I showing him? Is my picture on? I'm not so tech savvy, but I absolutely believe that we can be creative and find ways to overcome the fear, forgive ourselves for the mistakes we're making, and use this as an opportunity to explore education in ways that we have never done before.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I wanted to ask you, Simona, you write and teach how to beat on the challenges of transformation. And what is your advice for teachers adopting those new practices to teach online these days?
So I think technology is the way we will see the life in the future, and we are all here connected because of the technology. My number one lesson is that I'm very thankful for technology, even if I'm not a tech person, because I couldn't write a book with Susan, me in Romania and she in Washington, DC. So technology not only that gives us opportunities to teach our students, but gives us opportunities to be connected with friends and to learn from each other. So when we started to write our book together, we never ever envisioned that our book will be taught online. So this is a new thing for everybody, and I think this is the challenge of transformation, because a few weeks ago when I talked with you, our book was only on a print format. And now the technology is giving us the opportunity to have and view a book like ours, like Reshan, like everybody else, on a format, on a different format. So what we do with this and who is the person who touched the button is very important. So if you ask me how to do the challenge of transformation, is that we are transforming every single day. We wake up in the morning a person, and because of all our experiences, we go to bed a different person. It's a better one or a worse one. I hope to be a better one. But because we have this technology and we can spread the knowledge, the information, we definitely are a better one. What is my advice for teachers? When we wake up, it's you. When you go to sleep, it's you. Between these is the same person who learns and teach. So taking care of ourselves, learning who we are and who is the person who pressed that button and teach the lesson, it's very important, is equally important. So yes, technology is a new way of life. Technology is the present and is the future, and depends on us how we enter in our students' classrooms, virtual classrooms, how we enter now to connect with each other. So it's a beginning.
But you know, it might be a troubling beginning for many. We being in contact with teachers, we see many struggling adopting technology to their ways of teaching. As they have the need and necessity now to teach remotely, it is really difficult situation for them. And since you work with transformation, I just wonder, is there any advice that you can provide to teachers that struggle with digital transformation these days? I understand it's you, however you teach, but is there a way to build a scaffolding to switch from, change the mindset and not being so much intimidated by the technology, because it can be helpful, but it might be also intimidating.
Yes, there are a lot of things, but first of all, I think we have to be aware of who we are, because when we start to be aware of our emotions and thoughts, we can start to deal with them. Definitely, everybody knows that we are having mostly negative thoughts, and fear is one of them. And what the teachers who have teach remote proved that they could come the changes, so they overcame. I had a discussion last days with a friend of mine talking about change. Change is the most difficult thing we can have, because we feel that we can take this commitment, we can be on a path of change, but we still are not consistent with this. So my advice is that even if we cannot control the class, we can control ourselves. So to look at what we can control and how we can connect with ourselves and with the students, because a lot of people will feel that being online you are disconnected, but it's not true. It is different kind of connection. So my advice is that look for ways to stay connected and to keep the interest alive in your class, in your teaching, and this is a chance for technology to give us different opportunities for creativity, which we, in a normal environment, we take them for granted.
Oh, absolutely. And together with Reshan, we well understand those opportunities that exist with technology as we build those tools that are used by teachers. And that's why I wanted to ask Reshan about the control over tools. You know, we use those tools as we know everything about explain everything. We use explain everything in our practice. So we kind of like think that we have control over their experience, yet sometimes we don't. And this is what I mentioned when we began, that we tend sometimes to troubleshoot online, you know? So Reshan, what do you think? What are the steps to, you know, to adopt this new way of teaching mediated through technology, knowing that you never have a full control over the medium?
Well, I really like what Simona said about, you know, when you're feeling overwhelmed by so many things, you could start by focusing on that which you can control. And I think in the context of instructional design or teaching and learning, to a degree, at least, you know, for a common school cycle of a year, an academic year, you know what your outcomes are. You know what you're trying to design towards, whether they're the curricular goals, the social development goals, whatever experiences you intend for those people in front of you, the young people, the older people, whoever your student are. And that you can be clear on, right? And assuming that your goals are both timeless and timely, then those don't necessarily have to change. And then from there, you can really start working backwards in the same way you would doing any kind of progressive instructional design. So what's worth learning, right? Your goals. And then the next question is like, how will you know that your students have learned it, right? And then this starts to aim towards like how you are assessing learning. And now if you're over distance, the way that you've measured ongoing progress or even summative progress of your students will probably be different in a remote situation. But different doesn't mean impossible. Different just means different. And these days, there are different ways to accomplish or get to the same goal. And so once you're clear about, you know, being able to know what's worth learning, what's worth it for my students to learn, and how as a professional educator will I know if my students have learned it, now you start talking about instructional methodologies. Okay, now how am I going to communicate concepts and ideas, and how are students going to demonstrate their understanding of it along the way? So I think if you've got good habits and routines around instructional design practices, you're clear about the outcomes you want to achieve, those start to fall in line to what Simona said. Those are things that are under your control, right? And now you have to start problem solving. Okay, what are my new constraints? What are my new challenges? What are the new challenges and constraints my students are facing? And then you start trying to examine solutions and testing things out and finding things that can work in the most scenarios, because it's very unlikely that you're going to find something that's going to work in all scenarios. But it's almost like the mindset of the educator has to be both clear on what needs to be done, but willing to recognize that you might go deep down one path only to learn, you know what, I have to quickly pivot. But that's okay, because you learned a lot by investigating the wrong solution.
Yeah, yes, you're right. And you know, this leads me to ask Suzanne this question, because I remember when we prepared for the webinar, you mentioned, Suzanne, this subtle change between asking what I can expect from teaching versus what does teaching expect of me, right? So can we rephrase that and ask not what do you expect from technology when teaching, but instead ask what technology expects of me? What do you think, Suzanne?
I think it's an important question, and I've really given thought and looked at the research, and everything that I have read, or much of it, shows that the academic is there, but the academic is not the only thing that is going to guide you to be successful in remote teaching. It goes back to the characteristics that Simona and Reshan were saying, that we have to look at who we are and be our authentic self. I think even when teachers think of going online the first time they see their students, to be not only authentic but vulnerable, possibly in a different way than they ever have been. Because Bart, as you said, we're all going to make mistakes. Now the teacher who was in some control before may be reduced to less control. Does that mean that that person is any less valuable? No. If that person is authentic and vulnerable and not afraid of making mistakes, the teacher becomes part of the community with the students. So when you ask, what does technology ask of us? I think it asks of us to be more gentle with ourselves, more compassionate with ourselves and with our students, to look at and take ourselves maybe a little more lightly, because we're going to mess up. There is no way in the world. I mean, I could have seen even on this video that it was stopping and going. It's a different world. And I think this world is challenging us to let go of some of that control. We really don't have it, and feel free to be more authentic, more vulnerable, and not afraid of mistakes, feeling judged, and not judging others in return. So I think that we're learning many lessons from it, and we can be better teachers because of remote learning.
Yeah, so true, so true. And I can relate to that. I remember during one of our webinars, and it was actually 10-hour long live stream where we decided to explain everything about explainers. It was crazy, but we did that one day, and we had lineup of teachers and educators joining us, and one of them was Tony Vincent. He's very proficient with technology. He started with those Palm Pilots, teaching in a classroom with handheld devices very early, like 17 years ago. So he's super proficient, and he was yet open enough to take advices of his young students when he lost himself in a solution. He didn't know how to deal with the thing that he was doing in the class, having a tablet in hand, but he was open for students to help him out, to suggest what he should do next so the tool works the way he wants it. And
Right.
many teachers these days struggle with the same thing, control over their experience on the other end where the students are. I was in this situation, every one of us was in this situation. And that's why it leads me to another question on stress. When, things can go wrong, you have plenty of teachers on the other end who cannot fully control the experience. And Simona, according to your research, it seems that teaching is one of the most stressful professions, isn't it? Tell us about it.
So I was listening very carefully what you said. When an experienced teacher faces difficulties and he has to go on a request to one of their students, he definitely has to show that he's vulnerable, but this has a cost. So the cost is that he gets stressed, because even if he shows that he's fine and feeling okay, he has some feelings that, oh my gosh, how my students will perceive me. So stress. In a normal class, there is stress. And all the research show that the first three professional categories, which are the most stressed, are, and they are not connected to the pandemic now. They are doctors, nurses, and teachers. So welcome in the club.
Yeah, we've all been there.
So we are there, and unfortunately, we are in a serving profession. All of us, we are serving others. And when you serve others, you give from yourself. And when you give from yourself, you have to have a reservoir somewhere of energy which can be filled. But because we wake up every single morning with thinking at our students, we just go for it. And then there is a time when things are not working well, you feel overwhelmed, your thoughts are all over, and they are the first signs of stress. If we don't care of us, this will go into depression, burnout, and this is something which a lot of teachers face. So here we are. It doesn't matter when you are in a classroom or in a remote classroom, you will face this. But now, in these times, I think it was more intense because we have been challenged to change overnight the way we have been. So yes, stress is there. It is in our mind, it's in our emotions, we feel it on our body, but what we do with it? So
Yeah.
this is the things we look for answers with Susan, because when you are under stress, the first thing is that you lose your motivation and enthusiasm. And all the studies showed that the student's success is very connected to the motivation and the enthusiasm of the teacher. So what can we do? We have to address. And when you put your finger on a wound, that you will see that you have a wound. We have with Susan a very nice way of saying this. Normally, when you are alive, you take a pulse, but when you have fever and you are sick, you go and take a medicine. What do you do with stress? When you decide that you have over the limit, the stress, you can take some steps towards you, because the most important thing during these times is to keep your body and mind in shape for fighting. Fighting for lessons, fighting for your life, fighting for every day to be the best day ever. And what do you need? You need calm, you need a clear mind more than ever. Because technology, if you see it as a friend, it becomes your best friend. But if you are stressed and you don't feel comfortable with your new friend, it will give you a lot of blurred eyes. So, doing, like Rashad said, good routines and developing healthy habits, not only for teaching, but for your life, it's equally important.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
more than ever, stress, it is here and we have to overcome. And together we can do it. So first steps you can take by connecting to yourself. And I was laughing that I did all these workshops for more than 5,000 teachers in Romania and around the world.
Uh-huh.
And the people will say, oh my gosh, this is the lady with breathing.
But I can so relate to that. I can so relate to that because, you know, teachers that are in contact with us, they are kind of like this is a double situation. They teach, so they are under stress because of, you know, the distance to students these days, and they also have pressure from their peers. Their colleagues come to them for advices how to use this or that platform, explain everything, or other platforms that exist to be successful in this new situation. So that's why I think our conversation here is important. So we kind of like unravel this topic and show some guidance, at least some guidance. And you covered quite a bit in your book. So if you could like give us a quick digest where to look for help in order to deal with this stressful situation.
So I will look, first of all, I like very much to say that when we keep a positive attitude towards ourselves, we will see things in a different way. So when I have the light, turn off the light on the positive attitude, this is one thing which will help us to overcome the days, the difficult days. We will not say that they will not have difficult days, but when you look within you and you turn this light, you will see your strengths. Because most of the time we look for the things we don't have. We don't have the money, we don't have the time, we don't have the courage, I can't do it. Now our invitation is take that light and look within and look what you can do. And this light will illuminate your mood and your positive thoughts will be aligned. But this is not enough. How we can overcome stress? We were not born with resilience. This is a muscle which we can build. So building emotional resilience can be in the same way a very special practical exercise, but a very fun one. Each teacher who is now here on this webinar has resilience because they all went over the difficult times trying to communicate with their students, trying to do the best lessons they could do. Still, we have to go on. So when we take perseverance to achieve our goals, we will feel that our tank of energy is filled and we can give to others from our field. And what I like very much, and we had a laugh with Bart last time, we said that definitely takes optimism because this is what comes every time. But the last thing we have to keep in our mind is that we lose this while we grow up. When we were born, we were laughing and mothers didn't know why we laughed. We were crying and mother was thinking, what on earth they cry? But laughing is the one which characterizes each child. And the laughs of a child are at least 400 times a day. And us and adults, we are losing this. And our kids feel this. We laugh less than 15 times a day. So bring your humor back in the class, bring your happiness, and the kids will remember this. Will remember they can count on you, and they will join your gym for building their resilience. So
Simone, but I would say you're not affected, and Reshan is also not affected. That you're at least two people I know that were not affected by, this situation. I was just showing two pages from you. I was just displaying 2 pages from your book, and if you're okay with that, we could share some practices from the book when following up after this webinar with link to the entire material.
I love this. Yes, Susan and I, our dream was, we don't know how we can impact the life of others, but we know that we can share our experiences with others. And maybe one teacher, when she has a bad day, has that book open one day and something changed in her life because somebody there thought that a teacher deserves to have a page for her that day. So care and love, it's something which never ends. So this is what we have done.
Oh yeah, and the opportunity to embrace the framework that you wrote about, and you actually wrote it before COVID-19, right?
Yes.
It is now so relevant dealing with this situation, this stressful situation, and adopting technology to daily practice.
Yes.
We're happy to use your advice and your frameworks when doing the change. But as you mentioned before, and I guess Simone, you mentioned, Susan, you mentioned as well about the opportunities of this situation. And we spoke about those opportunities during 47 different webinars before during a year, and we were using this technical language to express those possibilities in terms of functionalities, in terms of use cases. But I wanted to ask Reshan, what new opportunities, without this tech talk, leaving it aside, what new opportunities do you see from remote teaching?
I think because the operating parameters are so different, and it forces essentially a redesign of most school programs. It forces institutions or districts or municipalities to be clearer about what their purpose is. Like, why is this social institution there for young people? So now I'm speaking more about K-12 schools. And then within that, there's tremendous opportunity to take some of those bad institutional or cultural or regional habits that have just kind of lived on in school systems for a long time. And now there's like, you know, an external force has now kind of ripped the Band-Aid off, so to say, to allow, you know, avoiding gradual change, right? Especially in areas where there are, you know, real problems. So like, you know, in the United States, if you look at most history curricula, it's very one-sided as far as whose story is told, right? So if you get clear about, well, what is the goals or purpose of teaching history and social studies in K-12 schools? And it's not about learning facts or learning the right history, but it's about trying to understand, well, human anthropology in one way, but how societies are developed, and in many ways to learn about how certain things happened, and hopefully apply those lessons to what might happen in the future. So I think if you get clear on that mindset, so instead of, oh, the purpose of history isn't teaching a certain set of facts, but rather how to think and apply understanding of what's come before us, then all of a sudden you could think about how can you be more impactful with the types of content vehicles you have students experience in service of those goals. And that's where you can also start to think about, well, what is most timely to teach, right? What is going to be the most relevant to young people so that they can make those connections, as opposed to arbitrarily teaching, well, Roman history, that's interesting. Sure, it is interesting, but how relevant is it to the modern connections you're trying to make? And so that's just like one example, and I'm, you know, specifically calling attention to it just because of what's happening in the United States these days. But I would say it's even more than an opportunity. I think it's a responsibility to do these things regardless. And I think these circumstances actually make some of these harder switches as far as direction and mindset and mission in many ways. You've cleared some of the hurdles, or this pandemic has cleared some of those hurdles that would otherwise be very difficult to work through when trying to change any organization or any region or anything as far as what's truly important.
Fantastic. And I think with this answer, you already answered the question coming from Luis Gustavo Molina, who asked how the situation changes online, how an online education changes the traditional way of teaching and learning in the classrooms. Suzanne, Simone, would you like to add something to what Reshan showed?
I would like to add, when I was listening to Reshan, it really resonated, because I think that the situation here in the United States obviously is a crisis situation and life is uncertain, but the virus has given us the opportunity worldwide to have a unique time where we are all experiencing the same thing. And I look at this time for teachers to say, we have the opportunity to make change in our teaching. And I have taught in schools in, close to 40 countries. And there's a theme that I see throughout the teaching where teachers, just as Simona was saying, they're stressed, they're unhappy, they have too much on them. We're much more alike than we are different. We have hit almost rock bottom. And if we can use this time to challenge ourselves, change our mindset, and take this and learn from it. And Bart, I think what you have here with Explain Everything, that there could be a source of good ideas and activities and ways that people connect socially and emotionally with their students. What a database that could be, because we're only at the beginning of learning it. And Simone and I wrote this book, and we believe it's important to go within. We believe in the importance of knowing who you are. But I think we have ahead of us a task to say, how do we get this to communicate our authentic self in the classroom? And with all of these teachers, there are ways that people have, and we gather those ways together. And I think we're going to make teaching better than ever because of this.
Yeah, Suzanne, I absolutely agree with you. But there's there's a lot that we need as teachers to go through in order to get there. So let me support what you said with question coming from Royce Blackburn. I'll read a question to you. I found a great many of my students were suffering from the isolated circumstances in which they were sequestered. While many of us use Zoom, I find its limitations at times interfere with connecting people. What ideas do you have to use Explain Everything to provide a sense of community and connection for my students? Right?
I would like to answer. One of the things I've been doing during this coronavirus is working with my 14-year-old grandson on, he's writing a book on emotions. But what I found is that he needed to process what happened to him during the crisis. What was the first time he heard the word coronavirus? What was the first emotion he felt? What was taken, then he got angry. What was taken away that you got angry? So I think that the emotional awareness for these kids and bringing them through a process of understanding what happened to them is crucial. It's crucial for the teacher too, to go through what happened to me and what did I feel. That equally for every student in that classroom, to some of them will be fine, some of them may have PTSD, some of the teachers may be fine, some of the teachers may experience psychological trauma. So I think it's the emotional awareness, but I have found with Noah, who's 14, that taking him through a process of understanding what happened to him gave him such a relief on, I'm not alone in this. He realized there are other people who are feeling this. So it's that connectedness in ways that I had never imagined when I first started helping him with this book. But connecting him to others who feel like he does, and the experience that we are all in this together. One thing he said is, I am so connected to everybody experiencing the same emotions, and I'm so isolated in my room alone. So how do I deal with that? So I think that it's being very creative and very aware of what we as teachers need to do to guide these kids into being able to talk about some of what they've experienced.
Yeah, absolutely. But also to process those emotions, sometimes you need something more than just video chat, right? Or just text chat. You need a visual side to express what you have on your mind. And that's why I think Explain Everything is important tool in the situation where we need to understand someone's thinking. And from my experience, I see sometimes teachers doing too much at first with technology, trying to achieve too much at first and not going through simple steps. So let me share my screen one more time, my whiteboard here, just to provide you with illustration what and already I'm using this visual layer in communication to be more clear. So that's also for Royce to elaborate more on the question coming from Royce Blackburn, is that, this platform, there are many platforms, but Explain Everything is a way to collaborate and engage in a visual way so we can process those things and explore understanding. But my advice would be to start small, is to start engaging in one-to-one. Let's say you have a student, as Susan mentioned, where we need to go through something, some experience, in order to arrive at some understanding of phenomena or point of knowledge, whatever it is. We can engage one-on-one with the whiteboard, right? We don't have to go all in and have a collaborative class collaborating, all class collaborating on the whiteboard. We can use such tool in one-on-one session just to support our understanding with visual. And by doing this in this smaller setting, just one-on-one, building the foundation for something bigger, right? Building the trust in the tool and our way to express through the tool, our way in authentic expressing through the tool. What do you think, Simona?
You took my word. I can't believe I was saying for so long. Trust.
I tried so hard. Thank you. Yeah.
You are guessing my thoughts. Something. So you see, we are connected. This is a clear example. So yes, I totally agree with all what Susan have said and you. And when I looked at the what you are pointing is that we have to keep in our mind that our students are at the other end of the computer side. But as you said, what do we do at the end of the lesson? We build trust, we lead them with empathy, and we focus on their needs also. So now more than ever, I think we should include in our classes and teaching a part of how do they feel, and ask them, how are you feeling? Are you okay? Because many of them, maybe they cannot express, they are very shy. And like we are here, I don't see other people, but we talk about us, So we build a circle of trust and a circle of understanding, and we are all in the same situation, and we learn from each other. So what I think is, at these times, compassion is a panaceum for these difficult times. So bringing this beside technology in our class, in every lesson, we can make a better world, and our students will be happier.
Great, thank you for that. Yeah, that is
Bart,
fantastic.
Can I say, yes, one thing. It was interesting when I was looking at the whiteboard, how connected the whiteboard is to the emotions. It's the same. What you're doing in technology is so similar to what we are teaching verbally, that I think that we're going to find that those connections are greater than we ever realized. So it was fascinating for me to say, well, I could have used that exactly how you were describing it to bring Noah's emotions out. It's the same, it's talking the same language.
And I just, hopefully you can see my iPad. I just wanted, we're getting close to the hour, but this whole time I've been taking notes. So maybe that's another good reason I was off camera, because all you would see is the top of my head. But Susan, what you were sharing, I mean, this goes back now 10 years when we first started building the tool, like the original version of the tool, which was a whiteboard that had recording, right? Like that was its main purpose. And what was very important to us was that we didn't like auto awesome or artificially polish what those artifacts look like. We wanted them to be true representations of how somebody's communicating and thinking. You'll notice I'm very deliberately using like a typed font, because my handwriting, that's what it really looks like. So I've made a choice, right? It's not going to automatically make it amazing. But we were never trying to create like a video making tool for the purpose of like doing what an iMovie or some other fancier thing for making a production. We were looking like, how can you replicate, what might happen if a teacher was looking over a student's shoulder or tapping them on the shoulder, asking them a question, what are you thinking about? Well, when you're no longer proximate, when you're no longer in the same physical space or working at the same time, how can technology mediate similar types of interaction? So that is kind of some of the underlying thinking behind a tool like this, is like not to replace relationships, but to recognize when a teacher cannot be next to 20 students, even a brick and mortar class, like you still cannot be side by side next to a child at all times. So how can you create more moments where you have that same level of like peer-to-peer or one-to-one type of interactions? How can you replicate sitting side by side with a student and really getting down to understand how they're thinking about what they're learning?
Oh, this is so nice.
Fabulous. It's fabulous, right?
Fabulous.
So Reshan, I hope you don't mind if we share your sketch note that you've taken during this webinar with participants as an illustration of communicating through visuals. And you did this during our conversation, is that right?
Yes, I started it at exactly like 3:02 p.m. Eastern. So that's and I've been filling it in. I mean, and I'm not just like randomly illustrating things. I've been very actively listening to what the conversation. And for me too, right? Like this is going to be a personal artifact for me. Like I will remember this hour in a very different way than I'm going to remember most of the other hours that I experienced today. Because
Yeah,
as we were talking, as we were engaging, as I was actively trying to process, hey, what are those, I'll share again, because maybe I'll do a quick, you'll get a lens into my crazy mind.
We love your
I loved when Simona said, we are transforming every single day. Like, it's simple, but yet so complex at the same time, right? If you put yourself in that mindset, well, you can't look like, oh, now I'm in a transformation mode. No, we're transforming every day. And then you said, you hope it's always for the better. And some days you might be transforming for the worse. And, and I loved this reframe, what does teaching expect from me? I think it's such a powerful thought, Susan. And then there's just so many other things that were happening that I just, it's like, oh, I love this idea of the building emotional resilience and how laughter is something that's typically diminishing as we age, and how you have to pay so much attention to it. So I'm grateful for this time we've had together, because I've learned a ton, and I've got so much that every time, and not that I'm going to actively open these notes or check them, but you have to recognize, I'll just give you a lens into like one of the other informal things about tools like these, at least for the next week or so, when I'm using it, every time I launch Explain Everything, I'm always going to have this gentle reminder, right? The simple thumbnail, which you see there on the left, like that is, at least for the next several days until my next 5 or 6 projects that I create, it's always going to live right there. And so I'm always going to have this visual cue of like, oh yeah, that happened. And that's hard to replicate, right? If it was a Word doc or a thumbnail of a PDF, it would have less meaning. But these simple visual cues are ways to reinforce experiences that might have been powerful. I mean, this is the amazing thing, like you hand your camera roll or you flip through it, just those like thumbnail orientations of pictures that you've recently taken, like it's an amazing thing how you quickly get these aggregate snapshots of things you really recently experienced. I really believe like the image thumbnail is like one of the most powerful reflective instruments there is.
It's fabulous. It's fascinating.
Yes.
This is great. We have so many questions that we cannot answer in 1 hour, but I can assure you that, having guidance coming from you, Simona and Suzanne, and frameworks that you wrote about in your book, having wisdom coming from Reshan in his books, we are working hard to make technology work for you. So closing with this remark, I want to leave you with one thought. There are questions that come, like, I'll quote one to you. This virtual learning is hard enough with students we already know and love. Yes, it is. What happens if next year we have to do it with students we don't know? That's why we need to make sure that we have a good guidance from you, and we have a tool that is easy and flexible and allows you to be yourself authentically in connection, even if this connection happens remotely. So by closing with this thought, I want to invite everyone that is interested in tools, techniques, but also guidance and suggestions from the thought leaders like Simona, Suzanne, Reshan, to join us for future webinars. We will resume our webinar scheduler before September to prepare you well for the next school year. So from me, thank you for everyone that who participated. Thank you, Simona. Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Reshan, for being here with us and sharing those words.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you.
Great experience. Thank you very much. All the best to everybody. Thank you very much.
Have a good vacation time. And yeah, we hope to see you soon. I mean, closer to the next school year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.